Hello and welcome to the GSpawn level designer tutorial videos. My name is Andrew, and in this first video I'm going to show you the basics of building modular environments. So make sure you have the GSpawn level designer package imported inside your project. Next, go to Tools, GSpawn, and click on Initialize. Once you do that, the plugin will create a bunch of assets that it needs to store its data. And once it's done, you see we get this grid inside the scene view, and we also get an object called GSpawn in the hierarchy view. Now you need to keep this object selected in order to interact with the plugin. Okay, now the next thing to do is we need to set up the prefabs that we're going to use. So go to Tools, GSpawn, Windows, Prefab Library Manager. I'm going to dock it right here, and then go to Tools, GSpawn, Windows, Prefab Manager. Okay, so prefabs are organized in prefab libraries, and a prefab library is sort of like a prefab folder. And I'm gonna be using a pack called Multi-Story Dungeons by ManaStation. I'm gonna click on this folder and drag and drop it right here in the Prefab Library Manager window. Once it's done, notice that it created this hierarchy of prefab libraries, and this hierarchy actually resembles the folder structure inside Multi-Story Dungeons 2 folder. Okay, now when I click on a library, notice that we get a bunch of prefabs in the right window, in the Prefab Manager window. If you hold down the middle mouse button and move the mouse over one of those prefab previews, we can rotate the prefab like this. And if you click on the small camera button, it will actually reset the preview rotation. Now if you click on the small yellow glowing button, it will highlight the prefab asset inside the project folder. Okay, now let's talk about the inspector UI that we have here. So the first toolbar, the one at the top that has 3 buttons, is a toolbar that allows you to switch between different modes of operation. So basically the plugin is divided in three main parts. You have object spawn, which allows you to spawn objects in the scene using using different spawn tools. Then you have object selection and manipulation, which allows you to work with existing objects in the scene, which is very useful for making changes. And then you have object erase, which allows you to erase objects using different erase tools. Now in this particular video we're going to talk about object spawn and object selection. Okay, so what we want to do is I want to build a small kind of like a dungeon room, and I'm going to start with the floors. So for laying out floors, we have this spawn tool here called box, and the box spawn tool allows us to spawn objects inside a box shaped area. So I'm going to select the base library here, and I'm going to double click on this base 01 prefab. When I do that, notice that the plugin has created an object in the scene. This is called the spawn guide. So I call this the spawn guide, and it's when you move the mouse around, notice that it snaps to the grid. There's this small orange dot which represents the pivot of the object, actually the object position, and that gets snapped to the grid when you move the mouse. Now I'm gonna place it here at the origin. We don't need to start at the origin, but I like to start at the origin usually. So I'm gonna left click, and when I left click, notice that we get these indicators of where the objects will be placed. We also get a label telling us the size of the box along the different axes. So I'm gonna place a 4x10 box right over here. Okay. Now you probably noticed that when we move the spawn guide, sometimes some of the objects light up. And the reason why this happens is because it's telling you that the spawn guide position is lined up with the positions of the highlighted objects, in this particular case along the x-axis. And this is useful because it allows you to avoid situations where, for example, you might move the spawn guide a little bit forward or backward, and you can create misalignments. But when the objects line up, you know for a fact that they line up exactly, and you're safe to place the object without causing any trouble down the road. Okay, so let's go ahead and place a few more in this direction, something like this. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to surround this area with walls, and there's a very handy feature for placing walls. It's called modular walls. So yeah, once I activate that, notice that it complains that no straight wall prefabs were found in profile default. So what it's basically telling us is that we haven't set up we don't have a valid prefab profile to work with this spawn tool, and this is what we're going to do next. Go to Tools, GSpawn, Windows, and click on Modular Wall Prefabs. Now Inside this window, you can see that on the left side, we have these 3 images which represent a particular kind of wall piece. It's kind of like tile rules. If you've used tile rules before, you know that basically a tile rule is it represents a way in which different tiles connect to surrounding tiles, and this is pretty much the same thing with walls. So we have a straight wall rule or a straight wall piece, which is just like a middle piece, a piece that sits in the middle, and then we have an inner corner piece which represents an inner corner, like a when the wall makes a turn, and then we have an outer corner piece. Next, towards the bottom, we have the up axis, which represents the way in which the wall goes up, and usually this is going to be the y-axis. Now, the most important field here is the example prefab. So the example prefab is a prefab that we're going to have to give to the plugin, and it will let it. The plugin will analyze it, and it will understand how to link the wall pieces together. Yeah. So the next thing we need to do is we need to build this example prefab. I'm going to switch to selection mode. I'm going to go to walls and arches, and I'm going to select this wall here, right here. This represents a straight wall piece. I'm going to click and drag and drop it in the scene, and notice that when I release the left mouse button, it will start snapping to the grid. I'm going to left click to commit, and I want to make sure this piece is really important, and this is the one that you should start with. I want to make sure that the rotation of this piece is set to 0 for all axes, right? Okay, now let's place the outer corner. Drag and drop, press Y to rotate, snap it into place, left click to commit. And now let's place the inner corner. Press Y to rotate, snap it into place, left click to commit. And now the last thing we need to do is the last 2 objects that we need to create is one object here at the end and one here at the beginning. So I'm gonna click on the straight wall piece that we have here sitting in the middle. I'm gonna press Ctrl D to duplicate, Y to rotate, D to enable snapping, snap it into place, left click, commit. Ctrl D, duplicate, snap, commit. Okay, so now we have all the objects that we need. This is the arrangement of objects that the plugin will analyze and decide how to actually link those pieces together. Okay, now I'm gonna select these. I'm not gonna select these guys, and I'm gonna click on the Create Prefab button inside the Prefab Library Manager. We have to, so this will allow us to create a prefab from the currently selected objects. I'm gonna give the prefab a name. I'm gonna call it wall example. And the destination folder, I'm going to pick the wall prefab examples destination folder. Now this folder already contains the wall example prefab from a previous recording. That doesn't matter because it will overwrite it. And the last 2 fields, pivot and pivot object name, don't really matter in this case, so we can just click on create. It will tell us that the prefab with the same name already exists. Would you like to overwrite it? Yes. Prefab successfully created. Now let's go ahead and click on this prefab. We're going to open it up, and the last step that we need to perform is we need to give those objects a name that the plugin will recognize. Yeah, so they have to have a specific name. Okay, so this wall piece right here in the middle has to be called middle straight. This other wall piece, the inner corner, is going to be called inner corner. This one, outer corner. Now the case doesn't matter. You can use all lowercase or all uppercase or a mixture, but it has to be middle straight, outer corner, inner corner, and then this wall right here is going to be called first straight, and this guy is going to be called last straight. Oh, without the bracket. Okay. Okay, so at this point we have the example prefab ready. We can actually, I'm going to press Alt R to switch to the plugin interface, and we can actually delete those objects since we no longer need them. And now we need to specify, we need to drag and drop the wall example prefab. We need to drag and drop it right here in this field, and we also need to specify the prefabs for each slot. So for the inner corner, I'm gonna drag and drop the inner corner right here in this area. Let's handle the outer corner. I'm gonna drag and drop it right here, and then the straight wall, I'm gonna take and drop it right here. Okay, so now at this point we're ready to create walls. I'm gonna switch to object spawn, make sure we have modular walls selected. Notice we have here a modular wall prefab profile, so you can have different profiles for different types of walls. Now in this particular case I use the default profile because we're only going to be using a single profile in this tutorial. But if you had multiple profiles, you would first have to make sure that you're using the profile, the right profile here in this field. Alright, in this particular case the default profile is already selected. Now what we have to do is we have to double click on a prefab in the prefab manager. Any prefab will do, it doesn't matter on which prefab you double click. The plugin will actually instantiate the straight wall piece that we have specified here. There you go. I'm going to temporarily disable the highlights by pressing space and also shift space to disable the labels. And notice that when we move the mouse around, the object is embedded inside those floor objects. So what we can do is we can either press Q or E to move the object up and down. We can also hold down CTRL SHIFT and use the mouse scroll wheel. Yeah. And we can also press R to reset the vertical offset. But the best way to handle this is we can use this feature called grid snap climb. So if I check this, the hotkey is Shift C. So you can turn this on and off by pressing Shift C. If I have this checked, when I move the mouse over those floor prefabs, notice that the object will climb them, and it will also snap to the grid at the same time. And this is incredibly useful. Okay, I'm gonna press Y to rotate, and I'm gonna start from here. Left click, then left click again to add new segments. Shift plus left click to commit. And notice that it has created this nice little wall. We have everything in place here. We have the inner corner, we have the outer corner, and the straight wall, and so on. Okay, now there's no. I want to show you a useful feature called Prefab Replacement. So currently there is no entrance in this room, no entrance, no exit, and that doesn't. That's not quite right. So let's go ahead and I'm going to click on this one of these prefabs here, and in the prefab manager I'm going to go upwards and I'm going to search for this wall arch preset. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and I'm going to left click to replace the object. And I'm going to go back here and use the same strategy. This time I'm going to select these two guys in the middle, and I'm going to use this guy. Now notice that sometimes when you use prefab replacements, the new object that gets created is actually going to be spawned with an incorrect rotation. So you will have to rotate the object along the y-axis in order to rotate it in the right place. Okay, let's do the same thing over here. There you go. Great. Now what I want to do next is I want to spawn a bunch of columns. Here in the columns library we have these column objects, and I want to spawn columns on both sides, on the left side and on the right side. And this is a nice chance for me to show you the mirroring feature. So let's go ahead and switch to object spawn, and this time I'm going to enable modular snap. So modular snap is basically it's what we've been using so far, but it's in this spawn tool called modular snap allows you to place a single object at a time. Up until this point we used box and modular walls, which allows us to place multiple objects at a time. But modular snapping is ideal when working with things such as columns, shelves, and props and stuff like that. Okay, so now one thing to remember is that all these tools here, the first 4 spawn tools that we have here, they all use modular snap settings. They all have this modular snap section here. Now it is important to remember that these settings are unique for each spawn tool. Yeah. So if I change the settings here, the changes are not reflected here. So for example, for modular wall snap, we have the grid snap climb enabled. If I move to modular snap, the grid snap climb enabled. The grid snap climb toggle is no longer enabled. So we're gonna have to enable it again. I'm gonna double click on the column, press Shift C, and there you go. Okay. Now let's. I'm gonna press Escape to kill the spawn guide, and before we start spawning the columns, I also want to enable the mirror gizmo, so I'm going to press Ctrl Q, and then notice that we have this mirror gizmo in the scene, and it has this blue plane. This is the plane along which objects will be mirrored. Now in this particular case, I want to mirror along the x-axis, that is along the red axis, so I can turn this off and just check the red axis, the red plane toggle. Now you can mirror along multiple planes at once, but in this particular case we're going to keep things simple and just mirror along the x-axis. Next, I'm going to click on the white handle of the mirror gizmo. Yeah, so the mirror gizmo has this white handle in the middle. I'm going to click on that and move it around in the scene. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that the mirror gizmo is centered inside the environment. So you can see that the objects on both sides of the mirror plane are highlighted, and some of these objects are actually the walls. So when both walls on the left sides light up like that, it means that the mirror sits in the middle of those two objects, and this is what we want. Okay, now I can double click on the column object. Make sure mirror rotation is turned on. We don't need it for columns, but we will need it for a bunch of other objects that we spawn later. And I'm gonna double click, and I'm gonna spawn a column here. Notice that it gets mirrored on the other side, and now I want to go in this direction. Now I want these columns to be equally spaced. So when I move in this direction, I want to make sure that that each new column is at the same distance from the previous column as before. So in order to do that, I'm gonna press space to turn on object highlights and shift space to make sure that we get the highlight labels. Now these labels show me the distance between the spawn guide and the highlighted objects. So in this particular case, notice for example that the spawn guide is aligned with the other column that I placed previously. It is aligned along the z-axis, and it shows a distance of 6. What this means is that if I place a column right here, the next column that I'm going to be placing, I want to make sure that it's also a distance of 6 from the previous column that I placed, right? And this allows me to make sure that all the columns are equally spaced. There you go. Now, since we have mirrored the columns on the other side, notice that we get this column here, which doesn't make any sense in this particular case because it's not sitting next to a wall. It's not necessarily incorrect. Maybe you want to have a row of columns going this direction, but in this particular case, I'm just going to press delete to delete it. Okay, now let's populate the area between these columns with a bunch of shelves. So I'm going to switch back to modular snap, and I'm going to go to the furniture library, and I'm going to search for shelf preset. I'm going to use this guy right here. Should we use, yeah, we can use mirroring. I'm gonna press it right here and here, one here, another one here. I'm gonna press Ctrl Q to disable the mirror gizmo because from now on I no longer want to mirror anything. Okay, now first thing we need to do is we need to handle a small issue. So notice that when I place those shelves, there is a space between the shelf and the wall plane. And the reason why this happens is because modular snapping will snap to the grid. It climbs the wall because we have the grid snap climb enabled, but it will also snap to the grid. Yeah. So what we have to do is in this case is this: we have to select these prefabs. I'm gonna switch to selection mode. I'm gonna select these prefabs. I'm gonna press Shift A. This will select all the prefabs, all the similar prefabs, right? Now I'm gonna hold down Shift and deselect these guys on the other side because we only wanna handle the guys on this side for now. And then once we have this object selected, I can press Shift F and then left click on the wall plane. and that will push the objects against the wall plane. Okay, now let's do the same thing here. I'm gonna hold down, I'm gonna select one of these objects, press Shift A, and because I want only these guys to be selected, yeah, I want to ignore the ones behind me, I can press Shift V to filter the objects that are out of view. So now if I look back, notice that these guys are no longer selected. I can press Shift F, left click to push them against the wall. Okay. Now, another thing I want to do is I want to make sure that, you know, currently we have all these shelves are using the same prefab, but you can look in, if you look in the prefab manager, you can see that we have different variations of different shelves, right? So I'm going to select the shelf again, press Shift A to select all of them at once, and I'm going to use the prefab replacement strategy, but I'm going to use a variation of it. So I'm going to go to the prefab manager, and I'm going to select all these shelf variations that we have here. I'm going to hold down CTRL ALT and then left click. And what will happen is that this time around, you notice that there is a different kind of prefab for each of these shelves. So it will randomly pick between these shelves that we currently have selected inside the prefab manager window. Yeah, so this is a really nice and fast way to add variation to your objects in the scene. And let's do the same thing with the columns. So I think we have a bunch of damaged columns. So let's go ahead and see if we can. Yeah, there you go. So I'm going to select these guys. Actually, let's use Shift A. And I'm going to select these columns here, here, and here. Okay, I'm going to press Shift A. Yeah, too much of the. So let me actually. Okay. And you can actually do this a couple of times until you're actually satisfied with the result. Yeah, this looks really good. Okay. Now I'm going to select this guy. It seems that it's out of place. It's residing inside the wall, so I'm going to press Y to rotate it, maybe, yeah, push it back a little bit. Okay, and there you go. So we have a bunch of okay, there you go. Yeah. So now I would like to show you how to use the Prop Spawn tool in order to place objects on mesh surfaces. So up until this point we actually used grid snapping, but sometimes you may wanna snap to the actual mesh surface or terrains or stuff like that. So Prop Spawn is very useful for that. And I'm gonna go to my furniture library and I'm gonna use this prefab. Now when you work with Prop Spawn, you can hold down the Shift key and move the mouse to rotate the object like this, and you can hold down the Control key and move the mouse to scale the object. Now you can press O to reset the scale to 1 and I to reset the rotation back to 0. I'm gonna press one of these guys here, another one here, 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 and here, and now I'm gonna select these guys, press Shift A, and then use the prefab replacement mechanism we talked about earlier to create variations of these guys. There you go. Okay. And now if we wanted, we could do the same thing on the other side. Let's do this with the smaller cupboard versions. Press Y to rotate. There you go. Okay. Okay, so of course we could go on in this direction and populate the area here, and we could add a bunch of other objects. We could extend with the floor further and add a bunch more walls, but this is essentially all I wanted to show you in this video tutorial. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.